Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is the Nathan Podcast about faith, flying, friends, and freedom. Today we have none other than Colonel Truitt Harper on the phone, and we're going to talk to Truitt about his love of flying, about his many flying adventures, and just some of the cool things that he's been involved with in his 77 years. How are you, Truitt?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Well, I thank you so much because we went through about half an hour of technical difficulties, and I just thank you for bearing with me and staying on the phone, really. So I appreciate you doing that. I wanted to talk to you about how you got started in aviation.
Well, I had always loved airplanes from the time I knew what they were, I guess, when I was 3 or 4 years old. Uh, and encounter I had was when I was about 13 or 14. I joined the Civil Air Patrol, but that didn't last very long because I never got to go to the airport. All I did was march and take notes in class. But
Mm-hmm.
after that, I uh, graduated from high school, went to Georgia Tech, was in ROTC, and after that, started taking flying lessons.
And what kind of aircraft did you train in, Truett?
A Cessna 150.
Okay. So they were new when you were doing that.
Well, yeah, they were. We had some decent, up-to-date aircraft. I was at Fulton County Airport
Okay.
in Atlanta.
Yeah. And that must have been a spacious airplane for you at the time.
Well, I don't know. It's still pretty tight with two of us in there.
Sure. And one of the things I know about you that we really haven't talked about was you were a missionary pilot in Niger. Can you talk to me about your time in Niger?
Well, my wife and I had originally been called to Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent 1 year in Ethiopia, and I was involved in doing a little bit of flying with MAF, but also working with the government and trying to get our aviation program started. And then it was decided that I needed to have my A&P license. So the mission sent me to Moody Bible Institute in Elizabethton, Tennessee to get my A&P.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, the government of Ethiopia was overthrown, so we could not return to Ethiopia. And they still needed a pilot in Niger Republic, which is in the Sahara Desert. So once graduating from my A&P school, we went to Niger, and I flew over there.
Okay. What type of aircraft did you fly in Niger?
We had a Piper 180 Comanche, and later on we obtained a brand new Cherokee Lance, 1976 model,
Okay.
and so we flew that.
Wow. What was your favorite aircraft to fly there?
There, well, I had two choices, so I guess the 180 Comanche was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if I had an airplane here, the Cherokee Lance would be ideal because it was 7 passengers. You could remove the seats in about 15 seconds and make it a cargo plane. And it was a very versatile aircraft that we used.
Hmm. So that was your favorite aircraft that you flew overseas?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What type of airstrips did you fly into? Were they pretty austere? I mean, I assume they weren't paved.
Well, our home airport was in Niamey at the international airport, so we had 8,000 foot runway with ILS and things like that. But out in the bush, most of the airstrips we went to, being in the desert, we didn't really have any short strips. If we needed more, we just graded a longer airstrip. There were probably two or three there were probably two or three that I went into that were fairly short.
Mm-hmm.
But as we went into other towns, they had, of course, had paved runways.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a mix of both.
Um, did you have any interesting stories about your time in Niger?
Well, the time that I lost my engine,
Did you find it
and
again? I'm sorry,
well,
go.
it was in parts.
Okay. Strewn all over Niger.
No, it stayed intact.
Okay.
But I was at the factory when they disassembled the airplane engine to find out what was the cause of the failure.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to witness that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a number of months after the failure.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And tell me about that engine failure. What do you remember happening? What did you do?
Okay, I had taken off from a very small airstrip, one of the few that's really uh, short. I had a family of four on board. I was taking them to their new mission station, which was only about a 30 or 45-minute flight.
Mm-hmm.
The visibility was not more than maybe 3 miles, with a lot of what they call harmattan,
Mm-hmm.
which is the result of dust in the air from a sandstorm.
Right.
I leveled off at 4,500 feet, and all of a sudden, after leveling off, I had a very high frequency vibration in the engine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told the fellow beside me that I was going to return to the airstrip to see what the problem was.
Mm-hmm.
And then during the turn, I could watch the oil pressure go down to zero, and the plane started vibrating really bad.
Mm-hmm.
I throttled back, and in about 2 minutes, I could move the throttle full throw, and nothing happened, and we were gliding down. I called Mayday, and immediately a British Caledonian airliner answered me. I asked him if he was in touch with the Miami Center, and he said yes. I told him our number, registration number,
Mm-hmm.
and where I was approximately, and whether he could get in touch with our mission organization, which he said stand by. And a couple of minutes later, he called back and said, yes, I've notified the center. They have notified your company, and they will be sending help. I was still continuing to glide down.
Mm-hmm.
I was over a gamer zone. At that time, it was called Upper Volta. Now it's called Burkina Faso.
Okay.
I came to a ridge which was probably about 60 miles wide. The sheer face on what I was facing was about 800 feet of a sheer cliff.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side, it's gradually sloped down into a high mesa.
Mm-hmm.
As I glided down, I came to the top of the ridge. I was about 200 feet above ground,
Mm-hmm.
and the ground sloped away at about the same rate that I was descending.
Oh my.
The side, I looked out to the left, and there was a footpath, which nobody was on the path, which is a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
So I told to the guy in the right seat, I said, we're landing right there. So I immediately dropped the landing gear, made a left-hand turn, and flared and touched down on the path.
Wow.
Partway down the path, the left gear hit a rut and bent the gear, and we stopped.
Mm-hmm.
The little boy in the back seat was still sound asleep.
Wow. That's what I call a good landing. Anyone that you can walk away from, right?
It was fairly smooth landing, and I took the cowling off and saw that the engine was seeping oil from about 10 or 15 different raised holes. It looked like somebody in the inside the engine had a ball peen hammer and was trying to break out.
Wow. Hmm. Hmm.
About an hour and a half later, I could hear the other plane overhead, but couldn't see him because of the visibility. And about 3 or 4 hours later, he knew about where I was. He knew where I had departed from because of the schedule.
Hmm.
And so here he is down the road in a Land Rover,
Hmm.
and we. So I don't know how much of the full story you'd like to hear or not.
Well, sounds like you had a really amazing adventure, and God's hand was on you that whole time.
Yeah, very much so.
Hmm.
From the fact that it wasn't a road, it was a path,
Hmm.
and there was nobody. But after we landed, probably within 10 minutes, there were probably 200 Africans all gathered around the airplane.
Hmm. Wow. 200. Wow. Hmm. Now, how long have you been a flight instructor?
45 years.
45 years. So that was one of the, I guess you got that license pretty quickly when you started your flying.
Well, not real quickly. I
Okay.
started flying in '66,
Okay.
and I uh, I received my instructor's license while I was in school for my A&P license
Okay.
because I did fly also. And
Hmm.
one of the options there, we had several options. We could get glider, multi-engine, seaplane, flight instructor, and so I chose flight instructor and received that.
Okay. How many students do you think you've had over the years?
Oh my goodness, probably hundreds.
And do you keep in
I
touch with a
haven't had
lot of them?
uh, very few,
Hmm.
very few. I know there's a bunch that I talk to fly who are not in aviation anymore,
Hmm.
and there's some that I've worked with are flying corporate jets now. So
Wow.
it's a bit.
Wow, that's well, I'm glad that some of your students have continued, and that's kind of, the way aviation is. A lot of folks are in it for a while, and then life changes, and they just do something else. But
That's true.
but
That's
you've
true.
but you've had the blessings and to be doing it basically your whole life.
I've been involved in aviation since that first time I was in the Civil Air Patrol, probably 14 years old.
Hmm.
Uh, worked as an aerospace engineer. Worked as a cargo pilot. Worked as
Hmm.
a missionary pilot, flight instructor, uh, and now involved with the Commerative Air Force.
Right. Now tell me about being an aeronautical engineer. How did you get into that, and what kind of things did you do?
Well, I went to Georgia Tech after high school, and of course, being excited about airplanes, I took up aerospace engineering and graduated from Tech with an AE degree, and immediately went to work for Lockheed as a test engineer on the C-5A Galaxy.
Wow. Now, what kind of tests were you doing?
I have done quite a few things. The first one I was involved with was some evaluation of the APUs that were associated with the environmental control system on the airplane, where you
Hmm.
take heat air off the engine, run it through heat exchangers, and use that to heat and cool the airplane. And when the engines weren't running, then we started up the APU and did the same thing.
Hmm.
So I was involved in that, and after those tests completed, I went to work in the fatigue test lab doing fatigue testing on the main landing gear.
Hmm. Wow. And those are some huge landing gear. I remember going to an air show at Shaw Air Force Base in about 1986 and walking through a C-5A and just being amazed at how big that airplane was and how small I was at 16, or excuse me, 6 years old. And just I was
Yeah,
in love with aviation. I grew up under the base leg of an airport called Kirk Air Base when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
And so I always saw airplanes. I couldn't figure out why they were always so close to my house and making a turn. And then when I started taking flying lessons, I saw air. I looked down on the base leg and saw my old house. I'm like, ah, it makes perfect sense. So,
Yeah. Right.
so like you,
Yeah.
I got bit by the bug when I was sitting in my sandbox at 4 years old, and then my parents moved out to
Right.
the country, and happened to move under Gamecock 1 MOA in central South
Uh,
Carolina. So we had a military air show every day in the early 90s, if you will. And
right.
so I grew up seeing the A-10s and F-16s. The F-16s would come in early in the morning between 8 and 10,000 feet, and they would clear out the airspace for the A-10s, and the A-10s would come in at treetop level. So my brother and I would go out into the field and wave at the A-10s. And so the A-10s
Yeah.
would fly over and they would bank their wings, and they were so low that we could see the pilot waving at us from the cockpit.
Oh, wow.
And they just
Yeah.
love that.
That. Yes, I'm sure.
So you and I, we have that bond of love and aviation, but we never had a C-5A in that MOA.
Yeah.
We did have a C-130 refueling two Jolly Green Giants at about 500 feet. That was pretty neat to
Wow.
see. Um,
Yeah, I'm sure.
no, you have flown with the Commemorative Air Force for how long?
I think it's around 13 years now.
Okay. And
Been flying with it.
what's your aircraft of choice, Colonel, with the
In the
CAL?
CAF,
Yes, sir.
I love flying our little L-16. They called it the Grasshopper. It was the
Right.
liaison aircraft in the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love flying it. It's such a fun little airplane.
Mm.
No starter. We had to hand prop it, but it was such fun to fly.
Mm. Yeah, those little aircraft and that are just take off and land so short, and that's how really you and I got involved with each other is through our mutual friend Daryl Neidlinger, who's a Vietnam veteran, and he had a Helio Courier, and one of our mutual friends has two Helio Couriers, and Daryl needed somebody to fly with him, and so you happily became his instructor. After 25,000 hours, he needed some brush up on his technique, I think, and so you agreed to fly with him. And
Yeah.
so you and I and Daryl and Mike Maurer have been all over the southeast, flying two Helio Couriers.
Right.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of great adventures together in those airplanes. They've been a lot of fun.
They have. They sure have.
Hmm. What do you think about the Helio? How did you like it when you first started flying it?
Well, I love to fly it, but I think I'll have to admit that the U-10 was the hardest tail dragger I've ever had to check out in.
Hmm.
I've flown, I don't know, 50 different types of tail dragging airplanes, and the Helio was the most difficult. I've flown many other tail dragging airplanes and
Hmm.
not had that much trouble with it. From the DC-3, the Twin Beach,
Hmm.
down to a peephole and all the different cubs and camps and Luscombe's and things like that.
Hmm.
But you're always fond of the one that you're in at the moment.
Yep. Whatever's getting you in the air is the most important at the time. And
That's
and
true.
and I
Yeah.
would have to agree with you. Of course, you have much more time than I have, but the Helio is a lot harder to fly than any other airplane I've ever flown before. But it's a very unique airplane, and we're very privileged to fly it.
Yes. And since it's a fairly rare airplane, there's not a lot of pilots that get a chance to spend much time in them.
Yeah. And so you said you've flown about 50 different types of aircraft. Is that correct, sir?
Tail draggers.
Tail draggers.
I
Okay.
just got my 159th different type airplane Saturday.
Okay. And what type of aircraft was that?
I flew a Stinson L5, which
Okay.
was the same year that I was an 1943.
Okay. Now you had an interesting adventure, I believe, in your little grasshopper. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened that day? You had a passenger you were given a ride, and you had another in-flight emergency. Tell me about that.
Yes, I, as the FAA and NTSB determined later that I had carburetor ice, which the carburetor heat could not take care of.
Hmm.
So I on a underground pipeline right of way.
Hmm.
Uh, and landed safely. Nobody was hurt. But the NTSB said that they had checked the weather and it was the perfect day for carburetor ice.
Mm.
And at the teardown, they said, well, there's nothing wrong with the engine.
Hmm.
And they said you did everything correctly. And the only thing we can attribute it to is carburetor ice, but we can't definitely say that because it's all melted now and gone. That was an interesting several weeks of waiting to have them check the airplane and look at my credentials and so forth.
Sure. Mm. Wow. Not something I want to do. But what was your passenger's reaction?
She said, I can tell my mom, she was British, actually she was Irish. She said, I can tell my mom now that I've survived an airplane crash.
Hmm.
And that was her reaction.
Now tell me about being a crew member on the B-29 Fifi.
Well, I had a friend at the CAF who was one of the crew members on the airplane,
Hmm.
and said that they were coming through on tour and would be going from Birmingham to Atlanta. And he knew that since I was a CAF member, he knew that I could ride on the airplane for free. And so he said, you'll just have to get your way to Birmingham, which I did. My son took me over to Birmingham, and it was a transition flight. So some of the other crew members were being trained in the flight, the scanners in the rear of the airplane.
Hmm.
And so they said, you don't need to be flying back in there because they might be working the train. So why don't you get up here in the bombardier seat,
Hmm.
which is the best seat in the. I flew there to Peachtree DeKalb Airport in Atlanta in the bombardier seat,
Hmm.
which you have plexiglass all around you, and it was the best seat in the house. And they said, why don't you try to become a crew member and fly when we go on tour?
Hmm.
So I did. I went to ground school the next year and volunteered to go out on training flights till I could get my 5 training flights in and be signed off as a crew member, which I did. And from there on, continued as a crew member, traveling pretty much all over the country, including Canada.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's
It's
great.
also fun.
Now, several years ago, you won some awards from the FAA. Can you tell me about those awards?
Yes, I got the Wright Brothers Award for 50 years of flying, and I also got the Charles Taylor Award for 50 years as a mechanic.
Wow.
And I was the fourth person in Georgia to have received both of them.
Wow.
They're now up to 6
Mm-hmm.
because 2 of our Dixie Wing pilots and mechanics have since gotten their award also, but I was number 4 in Georgia.
How many hours do you have total time now?
It's not really a lot because I'm not an airline pilot, but
Sure.
I have a little over 8,000 hours.
Wow. Well, I think that beats my 225 pretty soundly.
Well, for being a non-professional pilot, except for just a couple of years, that's quite a bit of time.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is the key to being an excellent and safe pilot, Truitt?
First of all, good training. And second is not to panic if there's any kind of emergency, but just do what you've been trained to do, and don't panic if something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you've been trained to do, and trust the Lord to bring you to a safe landing.
Mm. What do you attribute your success in life to?
The Lord.
Mm-hmm.
He's given me opportunities. He's let me get a good education. He's allowed me to fly many, many different kinds of airplanes. Not all as pilot. I've probably flown probably 300 in 300 different kinds of airplanes, from a DC-3 to a DO-24 to a Junkers Ju-52
Mm-hmm.
to a C-5 and so forth. So I've had quite a rewarding career in aviation.
What would you consider your greatest accomplishment in life?
Well, not from an aviation point, but from helping raise 4 kids who are all 4 Christians and who are all 4 parents now, who are hopefully following in our footsteps and training up their children and our grandchildren.
And if you could go back and give some advice to a young Truitt Harper, what would you tell him?
To pursue your dream, if it's flying, if it's music, if it's sports, whatever it is, to pursue your dream and do whatever you can to achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it may be costly from a money standpoint, but if that's your desire to do that, just stick with it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, Truitt, and for bearing with me during our various technological difficulties. I appreciate you having the patience with me on that. Appreciate you taking the time, really, to tell me about your flying career.
Well, I appreciate that, Nathan. It's been a pleasure.
And Lord willing, we'll have many more years of friendship and get to go flying a lot more times.
I hope so too.
And our prayers are with you and Miss Joy and your family as you go through some health struggles, and we're just with you in prayer and trusting the Lord that He's going to see you through that no matter what. We know that He wins in the end, no matter what happens.
That's true.
He does. Well, blessings to you, my friend. Thanks so much for talking with me today, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Okay, thank you, Nathan.
You're welcome. Well, folks, that's another episode of the Nathan Mackey Podcast, Faith, Friends, Flying, and Freedom. And we thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope that you'll join us next time for another exciting episode of the Nathan Mackey Podcast. Have a great day wherever you are. Bye now.